Stop throwing away old coins. The one sitting in your drawer right now could be worth more than your car. Hello guys, welcome to the Expensive Coins History channel. Think about that for a second. Something small, something you've ignored for years, something that might be sitting in an old tin box, a forgotten wallet, or tucked away in a drawer you haven't opened in a decade, could quietly be worth a life-changing amount of money. Most people never check. Most people assume old coins are just old coins. But the truth is very different. There's a hidden world that most men never explore, a world where history, rarity, and timing collide to turn ordinary-looking metal into extraordinary wealth. And today, we're stepping into that world together, because what I'm about to show you isn't theory. It isn't guesswork. These are real coins, real stories, real value. And by the end of this, you might look at your own collection, or even your spare change, in a completely different way. Let's start with a coin that almost nobody talks about, yet collectors quietly chase: the 1961 South Africa 5-cent coin. Now, at first glance, this coin doesn't scream valuable. It's small, simple, modest in design. If you found it mixed in with a handful of foreign coins, you'd probably overlook it. And that's exactly why it's so dangerous to ignore. Because value doesn't always announce itself. 1961 was not just any year. It marked a turning point, a shift in identity, politics, and national presence. Coins minted during periods of change often carry something special, something collectors look for, a story frozen in metal. And this particular coin sits right at that crossroads. But here's where it gets interesting. Not every 1961 5-cent coin is valuable. In fact, most are not. That's what separates the casual observer from the serious collector. The difference is in the details, the kind of details most people never think to check: condition, minting quality, subtle variations. These are the things that turn a coin from common to rare. Imagine two identical coins side by side. Same year, same design, but one has a tiny imperfection from the minting process, something so small you'd miss it unless you knew exactly what to look for. That imperfection might be the very thing that makes it incredibly rare. Collectors don't just collect coins. They hunt for differences. And in 1961, during a time of transition, minting inconsistencies were not uncommon. Some coins were struck differently. Some had minor alignment shifts. Some had sharper details due to less circulation. Others were preserved in ways that kept them nearly untouched for decades. Now think about this. How many people in 1961 carefully stored a 5-cent coin, believing it would be valuable someday? Almost none, which means finding one today in exceptional condition is like finding a needle in a haystack. And that's where the real value begins, because rarity is not just about age. It's about survival. A coin that survives in near-perfect condition for over 60 years carries something special. It tells a story of being overlooked, untouched, preserved by accident or intention. And collectors pay for that story. But there's another layer: demand. Over the years, interest in international coins has grown. Collectors aren't just focused on their own countries anymore. They're looking globally. They're searching for pieces that represent unique historical moments. And South African coins from the early 1960s have started to gain serious attention. Why? Because they represent a period of transformation. And transformation always attracts collectors. Now imagine this scenario: a man, maybe not too different from you, inherits a small collection of coins. Nothing fancy, just a few old pieces passed down over time. He doesn't think much of it, leaves them in a drawer. Years go by. One day, out of curiosity, he decides to take a closer look. He notices a small coin. 1961, South Africa, 5 cents. He almost puts it back, but something stops him. He does a little research, compares details, looks at condition, and slowly, he realizes this isn't just any coin. This is one of the rare ones, the kind collectors quietly compete for, the kind that doesn't show up often, the kind that turns a simple drawer find into something unforgettable. Now here's the part that changes everything. Coins like this have reached values that most people would never expect from something so small. And when the right version of this coin appears, the right condition, the right characteristics, the right timing, collectors are willing to pay serious money. Up to $108,000. Let that sink in. For a 5-cent coin. This is why you don't ignore old coins. This is why you don't assume. Because the difference between worthless and life-changing can come down to a detail you haven't noticed yet. And this is just the beginning. Because if one small coin from 1961 can carry that kind of hidden power, what about the others? What about the coins you've seen before but never truly looked at? What about the ones sitting quietly, waiting for someone to recognize what they really are? We're going deeper into this world. And the next coin might surprise you even more. Now imagine this, that you've just realized that one small, overlooked coin could be worth more than most people earn in years. Your mind starts racing. You begin to wonder, how many more coins like that are out there? How many have passed through your hands without you even noticing? Because here's the truth most people never hear. Rare coins don't look rare. They don't glow. They don't come with a label. They don't announce their value. They sit quietly among ordinary coins, waiting for someone who knows what to look for. And that brings us to the next one, the 1980 Hong Kong $2 coin. Now this coin is different. Bigger, heavier, more noticeable. If you've ever traveled, traded, or collected foreign currency, there's a good chance you've seen one of these before. It doesn't feel insignificant. It feels like something with presence, but even then, most people still overlook it, because again, not all of them are valuable. And that's where things start to get serious. You see, by 1980, Hong Kong was already a global hub. Trade was booming. Money was moving. Coins like the $2 piece were produced in large numbers. They were used daily, passed from hand to hand, spent without a second thought. So why would one of these be worth anything today? Simple, because the ones that matter are not the ones everyone used, they're the ones that somehow escaped the system. Coins that were struck differently. Coins that didn't circulate much. Coins that carry small, almost invisible differences that only experienced eyes can detect. And here's what makes this coin fascinating. There are versions of the 1982 coin that stand out because of subtle minting variations, slight differences in edge detail, design sharpness, or metal composition. To the average person, they all look the same. But to a collector, those differences are everything. It's like two watches that tell the same time. But one is mass-produced, and the other is a rare, limited piece that collectors will chase for years. Now think about how many of these coins were simply spent and worn down, dropped, scratched, exposed to decades of handling. Most of them lost their sharpness, their detail, their appeal, but a few, just a few, survived differently. Maybe someone kept one in a drawer. Maybe it sat untouched in a collection. Maybe it was forgotten in a box of foreign currency after a trip that happened decades ago. Those are the ones that matter. Because condition is everything. A coin that looks almost new after more than 40 years immediately stands out. It tells collectors something rare has happened, that this piece avoided the wear and tear that destroyed the value of millions of others. And when you combine that with the right variation, the right minting detail, the right level of preservation, you get something special, something scarce, something powerful. Now let's talk about human nature for a second. Most people don't look closely at coins. They don't study them. They don't compare them. They don't ask questions like, is this one slightly different? Or does this detail look sharper than usual? They just spin them. And that's exactly why valuable coins continue to slip through the cracks. Because the world moves fast. People don't slow down long enough to notice small things. But collectors do. They slow down. They examine. They compare. They understand that tiny differences can mean massive value. Now picture this scenario. A man cleaning out an old storage box finds a handful of foreign coins. Nothing organized, just random pieces collected over time. Among them, a 1980 Hong Kong $2 coin that he almost tosses it aside. But something about it feels different. Maybe it looks cleaner than the others. Maybe the details seem sharper. Maybe it just catches his eye for no clear reason. That moment, that pause, is everything. Because that's the moment curiosity takes over. That he looks closer, he compares, that he starts to realize that this isn't just another coin. This is one of the rare variations collectors search for, and suddenly, something that once felt ordinary becomes extraordinary. This is how discoveries happen. Not in museums, not in auctions, but in everyday life. In drawers, in boxes, in forgotten collections. And here's the part that really makes you think. Coins like this, when they meet the right conditions, rarity, preservation, demand, have reached astonishing values. Up to $89,000 for a coin that many people have held without ever giving it a second thought. That's the difference between knowing and not knowing. between looking and truly seeing, between spending and discovering. And by now, you're probably starting to feel it, that shift in perspective, that realization that maybe, just maybe, there's something in your possession right now that deserves a second look, because we're only halfway through. And the next coin takes this idea even further. Now let's take that feeling you have right now, that curiosity, that slight tension in your mind, and push it even further, because by this point, you've seen how something small can carry massive value. You've seen how age, condition, and tiny variations can quietly transform an ordinary coin into something extraordinary. But the next coin introduces something even more powerful: recognition. The 1994 Australian $2 coin. This is not some obscure piece that only a handful of people have ever seen. This is a coin millions of people recognize instantly. It has a strong design, a bold presence. It feels modern compared to the earlier coins we talked about. And that's exactly why it's so easy to ignore. Because when something feels familiar, we assume it's common. And when we assume it's common, we stop paying attention. But here's where things start to shift. 1994 was part of the early years of the Australian $2 coin series. And early issues of any coin series often carry something special, not always obvious, not always visible at first glance, but something that collectors watch closely, because the beginning of a series is where inconsistencies happen: new designs, new processes, adjustments at the mint, small changes that get corrected in later years. And those early differences, the ones that don't last, are exactly what collectors look for decades later. Now think about how many of these coins were actually used at a lot. They circulated heavily, passed through countless hands, used in everyday transactions, dropped, scratched, worn down over time. So just like before, most of them lost what made them valuable, but not all. Some were pulled aside, some were kept, some were preserved in a way that allowed them to survive in near-perfect condition. And then there are the rare ones, coins that carry slight variations, maybe in the strike, maybe in the detail, maybe in the way the design appears under close inspection. The kind of differences that don't stand out unless you know exactly what you're looking for. This is where things get interesting, because now you're not just dealing with an old coin, that you're dealing with a coin that people still recognize today, which means it's even more likely to be overlooked. Let me explain that if you find a very old, unusual coin, your brain immediately tells you, this might be worth something. It feels rare. It feels different. But if you find a coin that looks familiar, something you've seen before, your brain does the opposite. It tells you, this is nothing special. And that's where people miss opportunities, because rarity doesn't care about familiarity. That a coin can be widely recognized and still have rare versions hiding in plain sight. Now imagine this. Someone empties their pockets at the end of the day. Among the coins, a 1994 Australian $2 piece. It looks normal, feels normal, just another coin. They don't even think twice. But what if that coin is one of the rare ones? What if it has a subtle variation that only shows under careful inspection? What if it's been preserved better than most, holding on to details that others have lost? That's the difference between spending and discovering. And most people spend. They never pause. They never look closely. They never ask, what if this is different? But the ones who do, the ones who take that extra moment, are the ones who find value where others see nothing. Now let's talk about collectors again. Collectors love patterns. But more importantly, they love breaking patterns. They search for the coin that doesn't quite match the others, the one that stands out just enough to raise questions. And when they find it, that's when value appears. Because now you have something that isn't easily replaceable, something that isn't sitting in every pocket, something that has a story, a difference, a reason to exist beyond the ordinary. And that's what drives demand. Not just age, not just metal, but uniqueness. Now picture this moment: a man, maybe going through old belongings, finds a small group of coins. Among them, a familiar Australian $2 coin from 1994. He almost ignores it, but something makes him look again. Maybe it's the condition, maybe it's the detail, maybe it's just a feeling that it doesn't look like the others he's seen before. So he takes a closer look. And that's when everything changes, because the more he examines it, the more he realizes this isn't just another coin. This is one of the rare ones collectors search for, and suddenly, something that once felt ordinary becomes something powerful, something valuable, something worth far more than anyone around him would ever expect. Because coins like this, when they hit that perfect combination of rarity, condition, and demand, have reached incredible values. Up to $67,000. For a coin most people wouldn't even think twice about. That's the power of awareness. That's the difference between seeing and truly noticing. And now, we're at the final stretch point. One more coin point, one more story. And this last one might change the way you look at modern coins forever. Now take everything you've felt so far, the curiosity, the surprise, that quiet realization that something small can hold incredible value, and bring it with you into this final piece. Because this last coin doesn't come from a distant past. It's not from a time most people have forgotten. That it's not something you'd expect to be rare. And that's exactly why it matters. The 1999 British 20p coin. This is where things become almost unbelievable, because unlike the earlier coins, this one feels recent, modern, familiar. The kind of coin that people have handled countless times without ever thinking twice. It doesn't look ancient. It doesn't feel historic. That it feels ordinary. And that's the illusion, because sometimes the most valuable things are the ones hiding in plain sight, right in the middle of everyday life. Now here's what makes this coin different from everything else we've talked about. Mistakes, not damage, not wear, not age, but actual minting mistakes. You see, coins are produced in massive quantities, millions at a time. And when you produce something at that scale, perfection is impossible. Small errors slip through. Tiny inconsistencies make their way into circulation. Most of those errors are insignificant, but every once in a while, something unusual happens, something that wasn't supposed to exist. And when that happens, you don't just get a coin. You get a rarity. The 1999 British 20p coin became known among collectors for exactly this reason. Certain versions were released without expected design elements, subtle but critical details that should have been there, but weren't. To most people, it still looks like a normal coin. But to someone who knows what to look for, it stands out immediately. And that's the theme you've seen throughout this entire journey. The difference between ordinary and extraordinary is almost always hidden in the details. Now think about how many of these coins were actually used. A lot. They circulated widely, passed through shops, pockets, wallets, used in everyday transactions without a second thought. And because they looked normal, no one stopped to examine them closely. That's how rare coins survive. Not because they were protected, but because they were ignored. Now imagine this moment. Someone receives change after a purchase. Among the coins, a 1999 20p. Nothing unusual, just another piece of currency. They put it in their pocket. Later, they empty their pockets onto a table. The coin rolls slightly, catching the light. For a brief second, something looks different. Maybe a detail seems missing. Maybe the design doesn't look quite right. Most people would ignore that feeling. But not everyone. Some people pause. Some people pick it up again. Some people take a closer look. And that's where everything changes. Because when you start paying attention, you start seeing things others don't. You start noticing differences. You start asking questions. And sometimes those questions lead to answers that completely change your expectations. Collectors understand this better than anyone. They don't just look at coins. They study them. They compare them. They search for the ones that break the rules. Because when a coin breaks the rules, it becomes something rare, something desirable, something valuable. Now let's bring everything together. That you've seen a small 1961 coin that could be worth an incredible amount because of its rarity and condition. That you've seen a 1980 coin that hides its value behind subtle variations. That you've seen a 1994 coin that proves even familiar designs can carry hidden worth. And now, a 1999 coin that shows how mistakes can create opportunity. Point 4 different coins. Point 4 different stories. Point 1 powerful idea. Value is not always visible. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't stand out to everyone. It waits for the right person to notice it. And that person could be you. Because right now, somewhere in your home, there might be a coin you've never looked at closely. A coin you assumed was ordinary. A coin you almost threw away. But what if it isn't ordinary? What if it's one of the rare ones? What if it's been sitting there all this time, waiting? That's the question that changes everything. Because once you start asking it, you don't look at coins the same way again. You slow down. You pay attention. You examine. And suddenly, something as simple as spare change becomes a field of possibilities. Now here's the part that brings it all into focus. Coins like these, when they meet the right conditions, the right rarity, the right demand, have reached values that most people would never expect. 1961 South Africa 5 cents, up to $108, 0001980 Hong Kong $2, up to $89, 0001994 Australian $2, up to $67, 0001999 British 20 pence, up to $80, 000. Let that sit with you for a moment. These aren't giant treasures, they're not gold bars, they're not locked away in vaults, that they're coins, small, quiet, overlooked, and yet, under the right circumstances, they can be worth more than most people imagine. So the next time you see an old coin, don't ignore it, don't assume, don't rush past it like everyone else. Pick it up, look closer, because the one sitting in your drawer right now could be worth more than your car.